And that's what we're actually talking about. Your father, we are here now talking about the Rockefeller Drug Laws and the fact that Herbert Chauncey was actually convicted under those laws. And what we're doing is kind of applying or attaching a life to the lifespan of the law, since it was some of it has been repealed.
You keep hearing that the Rockefeller Drug Law didn't come into effect until '73, but I was sentenced in 1971 under the Rockefeller Drug Law to 15 years to life. Of course, at the time, I didn't think it was a right sentence for selling drugs, but it's what it was. That's also, you did the crime, you had to do the time. That's what they had out there back then. But if you got caught, you were supposed to pay for it. And so I paid and paid. And to say that it didn't affect me would be disingenuous, because it did affect me. Mostly it affected me because I was away from my family.
And I bet if my father had to do it all over again, what would serve him best would be to be on the outside of a prison to help raise his family.
Now, this was read on the Drop the Rock website. It said that the number of prisoners in jails are down by 14,500 prisoners, and crime is down by 28% over the last 10 years, and yet they're still building more jails. I mean, they literally have empty jail beds. What do you think about the fact that building jails is still something, I guess, that they deem as profitable or necessary, given the fact that crime is down? Is there a bigger plan? Is there a target?
I just know in my heart that there's just something unjust about having a prison full of African American men in jail for crimes that physically hurt nobody else and only involve people who did it of their own free will and were willing participants.
When it comes to big business, pharmaceutical, religion, the building of prisons and incarceration, those are all big business items for not just for the private companies that run those things, but for the government as well.
It's absolutely modern day slavery. There's a whole corporate entity associated with prisons and making these inmates work for practically slave wages for corporations who then turn around and make profits unheard of off the backs of these inmates.
I don't put it past the government to do everything it can to support those things. So if that means finding a way to arrest more people, I don't put it past the government.
We got you, nigga.
Yeah, I remember my grandmother pulling out Clipper when I was about 13 years old. At that point, my father had been in prison for 13 years. And I had been visiting him since I was a baby, about 3 months old. And so I thought that, he couldn't be in prison for something small, so I thought perhaps he murdered someone.
I used to believe, I think we both believed that he was in jail for murder, because to hear that your grandfather's in jail for 20 years, 15 years, 25 years, that could only mean murder. Like, who else goes to jail for that amount of time unless they, kill somebody or attempted to kill somebody or somebody's,
And I never asked anyone, but my grandmother finally told me that he was one of the early convicts of the Rockefeller Laws, and he was targeted by the governor.
We're going to talk about the law itself in the judicial system. Do you think that the mandatory sentence that is accompanied with the Rockefeller Drug Laws, do you think it ties the hands of the judges to actually give out a fair judgment sentence rather than already having a mandatory sentence stipulated? Is that still a judge if he's not able to judge the sentence that's given out? What are your thoughts on that?
There are mandatory sentences for just about every felony. I kind of get that. However, when it comes to the drug laws, I think the flaws are abound. I mean, what they classify as Class A felony opposed to a lower class felony, all of that is so flawed and unfair. And I think that if the majority of folk that were not caught, captured, or targeted weren't minorities, then that would not be the case.
People just feel powerless and they don't think that they have a voice, and they think they won't be heard if they make noise, that people are just brushing aside. Well, maybe one, maybe two, but we all know there's so many more places we need to be going, as heading upward and onward, as far as justice for the African American experience in America. I mean,
As a child in elementary school, I remember that I would ask my friends, you know how when you go to prison or you visit somebody in prison, and they were all like, I've never been to a prison. And then it dawned on me that, that's my experience.
I remember waking up early in the morning. I remember packing bags, 6-hour van ride, cold facility, steel everywhere, bars everywhere, metal detectors everywhere, security everywhere, barbed wire. I remember the barbed wire probably the most.
Somehow or another, I recognized that it being a unique experience, it had to have shaped me in some way. Like, how could it have shaped me differently?
I absolutely do not believe that prison is the appropriate setting for children. I don't believe a child should be subjected to going on a regular basis.
I appreciate who I have become with all those experiences. At the same time, I recognize how it is really important that those of us who know step in and aid children who are in our circumstance, because children should not have to take on that mantle of responsibility so early because of those types of situations.
Nothing has been given to us. We've had to fight for every single piece of legislation, piece by piece, little bit by little bit, but it's not enough, and it's not happening fast enough. Everybody you talk to has a family member in prison, and they feel like they're there unjustly. But I mean, realistically, if it's a drug charge, non-violent, sometimes first offenses, disproportionate sentences for those who sell crack as opposed to those who sell powder cocaine. I think the repeal or some repeal of the Rockefeller Drug Laws is a step in a positive direction to further our cause for civil rights. You know what I mean? Like, who has to fight to be free from?
What motivates me is knowing that at the end of whatever it is I'm doing, that I will have made a mark of some sort. I do recognize that I still have an ability to be a role model for them, their children, and for the children that I work with and that I come in contact with throughout the world. Part of my goal is to inspire them to avoid the pitfalls, to recognize their worth, and to live their highest possibility. If that's mentoring some kids that I leave them better than they were. So what motivates me is really the outcome of whatever my commitment is.